This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kylie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Special edition for The Baseline. Trade deadline / buyout edition. Putting it all together. And while the NBA continues to make all of their players look like just the bounty list, and make executives earn their keep. I mean, today feels like just a hurricane full of trades and maneuvers, and yet when it's all said and done, you really have no idea where everything stands. Not until you start seeing some of these new faces in new places get on the court and acclimate themselves with the new teams and the new circumstances under which they're playing. So there's so much to get into. Obviously, we're going to be talking about a couple of moves made, some winners and losers. But our listeners are always the winners because they get to hear my man, 50 grand, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holler back at me, Mr. Shaw. I'm sure that you were steadfast on your Twitter handle watching all of these moves blow through the course of the day.
It was a live and exciting day, especially in the beginning. It tailed off a little bit towards the end. They got one final kind of major move in before the deadline buzzer, if you will. But yeah, it was wild. And I even got caught by a fake account, a fake Woj account that got into the feed of a person who I do follow who is verified. So, if truth be told, it wasn't my fault. But some fake news was put out there, I think, about a Kyle Lowry move that ended up never coming to fruition. So a lot of people got caught by that. But outside of that, it was quite the eventful day, as I tried to manage my full-time job while also paying attention to what's happening in the NBA.
So I know we're going to, talk about teams that clearly won out, making some key, trades to acquire, players, to fill out certain roles for their playoff run. I'm probably more so interested on the teams that didn't make moves, whether or not we consider them winners or losers in this, Shaw. And probably the biggest name that over the last 48 hours, a lot of people expected to be moved. And to your point, almost to the point where even fake Woj accounts felt compelled to figure out a way to move this dude. And yet the Raptors didn't move Kyle Lowry. And I want to get your take on that really quick because it seems to me that either the Raptors were asking for way too much or the teams that really, really, really felt that they needed someone like a Kyle Lowry didn't think it would be prudent to give up whatever was necessary if you are in the best position possible to be contending for a championship.
So I think I'm glad that we started here because it kind of gets the elephant out of the room, right out the way. And in this instance, where I'm going with it, where is Lowry is still going to be a free agent this summer. And that's what it boiled down to. The Lakers, the Heat, and the 76ers are the three teams reported to have the most amount of interest, and we're kind of in it to win it towards the end. But when you break it down, it's like, we have a chance to get him and not have to give up anything in the summer. Or the other part of it as well, too, is even if you feel like you may have to give up something, maybe you don't have to give up as much as you want to right now because Toronto is not likely to just lose Lowry. If he goes, and I'm assuming he will go this summer, he probably would be amenable to a sign and trade of some sort so that the Raptors don't lose him for nothing. So while Masai's price might have been astronomical here today as we record, as teams try to make this playoff push, maybe that price goes down a little bit after some other teams shake out, some other moves are made, the draft, the lotteries decided, and kind of you understand what's coming out in those aspects as well. maybe that package price goes down a little bit and you can still move them on to one of those potentially 3 teams if they still have the interest. I think Miami may still have interest. It depends, obviously, what happens with the other moves that they made, and another guy that got moved over there in Oladipo. But I think Philly and the Lakers will always be out there if those are destinations he ultimately wants to go to.
All right, well, since you went ahead and got the elephant out the room, I'm going to be that irritable mouse in the room that is just clearly aggravating the bejeebus out of the elephant. Okay, so here's my take on this. No matter what you tell me, and no matter how you convince me, the Philadelphia 76ers, I really feel like, lost out on this trade deadline. No matter what moves they've made to make themselves a better basketball team, to be competitive, I feel that they lost big time here. And here's my reasoning behind this. This has nothing to do with the idea of, well, that Lowry's going to be available come next season, right? My problem with this is Kyle Lowry is an NBA champion now, right? At the point guard spot, a spot where if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, you cannot not have enough of that on your roster. A gritty, competitive player who I think is going to be a bulldog in the playoffs, which is what you want against the premier guard sets that are coming out of the Eastern Conference. And he's from Villanova. He's a Philly favorite there. I feel like all of those things were in place. Like, it's almost like the moon and the stars were aligned perfectly. That if Kyle Lowry's name is being bantered about this NBA season, you're the Philadelphia 76ers, you have the best record, or if not the second best record in the Eastern Conference, and practically a top 3 team in the NBA altogether, and you're Elton Brand, and you don't do this deal to get a championship caliber player on your roster to accompany what you're getting from Joel Embiid, who could probably be the MVP this year, a career high caliber player in Tobias Harris, solid play from Ben Simmons and everybody all together. You don't make this move. I don't know what you're telling the Philadelphia 76ers fan base, because no matter what you tell me, we often talk about the Celtics window being closed. If you're the Philadelphia 76ers, what kind of window do you truly have if the perennial powerhouse is coming out of Brooklyn and you have an opportunity to get a guy like Kyle Lowry on your roster, who I don't think would mind playing in Philly if it's going to give Philly an opportunity to snag a chip, right? Like, Philly's done that before. They haven't done it in a long time. So that's, to me, when I see, we'll get into the Celtics, but these are the type of moves not made that really just irk me to no end, because I fail to see how you don't see that you shouldn't try to do this when you realize the kind of team that you have in place, ready to go with the kind of head coach that you have with Doc Rivers. I don't understand it.
Well, I mean, I think it's all about cost, though. So reportedly, and we never know the actual deals here, but reportedly it would have cost them at least Tyrese Maxey, who they just drafted. So maybe there's no attachment there. Matisse Thybulle, who is a part of their rotation defensively, right now. Danny Green to make some salaries work, and potential multiple first rounders or pick swaps. It's a lot for a 35-year-old point guard. Now, again, he is a champion. He is a Philly native and all of those things, but can you, for lack of a better phrase, mortgage your future, and take that chance at that cost? And I think for not even Elton Brand now, because remember, it's Daryl Morey who's really calling the things there right now. Elton Brand is kind of reporting to Morey. They probably got together and said the same thing I said in the beginning. It's like, well, he is a Philly native, so maybe there's a chance to bring him in the summer, and we don't have to give up all of our young assets and multiple picks just to make Masai happy right now, and in essence to save face. It's tough. I think he would have been a great fit there. I think arguably of all the 3 teams, probably the best fit there, and getting Simmons maybe a little bit off ball and maybe you using Lowry and Simmons in pick and roll action. That could have been fun. I think that could have given Philly a leg up here in the Eastern Conference, especially with Embiid on the shelf currently and hoping he's able to return within the next few weeks. But if that injury lingers, you'd want to have another kind of, gun in the chamber, and Lowry would have did that for them.
But you're saying, all that being said, Shaw, you are basically saying that you could very well be conceding championship aspirations for this Philadelphia 76ers team. I'm not saying that Kyle Lowry does it all, but what I am saying is you cannot do any, you can't tell me you couldn't do any better. In the class of all of these guys that are available and the needs that need to be met for the Philadelphia 76ers, to me, it would have made sense that you do choose to roll the dice only if you recognize that this team is championship worthy. And again, I hear where you're coming from. I guess I'm just probably more surprised that Daryl Morey, right, who AKA was the gambler out there in Houston, suddenly is pulling his punches, or under collaboration of Elton Brand, who just, the last couple of years, he's basically under the hot seat for some of the moves that he's made. They're suddenly pulling their punches on bringing a guy. To me, something giving up for Kyle Lowry, to me, is more sound than some of the moves that both of these guys have done combined over the last 3 years for their respective teams. But this is a championship caliber basketball team. So you're telling me.
So let me. So on. So, but and again, I think it's a great point you're making. But you're a Matisse Thybulle guy. Like, you've admitted and say that you like him. You like him a lot. Think he's a good player. So if it costs you Thybulle, Maxey, Danny Green is just salary filler, but Thybulle, Maxey, and picks, you think that was worth it for them this year, knowing they still have a chance, and a chance is not a definite. So I definitely say that it's not a definite, but a chance to maybe still sign him outright in the summer. But you would have given up Thybulle and Maxey to get Lowry right now.
Yeah, and the reason why I'm saying this, Shaw, is because it's based on the belief of how Doc Rivers is utilizing the players, right? The assets to me are the draft picks, right? That's all in Morey and Brand's, ballpark. But the player personnel, right? You're telling me that Doc Rivers will probably not be able to figure out a way to really, cohesively put this team in its best position. Having a guy like Kyle Lowry, he needs a floor general. He really does. Probably more so than Matisse Thybulle, because I believed that Matisse Thybulle was as equally an important piece, but clearly that's not the case with Doc Rivers, right? Like back in the beginning of this season, Thybulle was getting spotty minutes. And I don't think much of that has really changed much. The only thing is that the Sixers in the spotlight are still one of the best teams that are out there. Certainly Thybulle is part of that, but I don't think he's key to that. And if you're telling me that in the end, when it comes down to it in the playoffs, who do you want out there really kind of anchoring this team in critical moments? You're telling me you're going to rely on the play of Kyle Lowry over Matisse Thybulle because you believe more in what Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons and those guys are doing? I'm sorry, I don't think so, right? Like, as good as those guys are, having a Kyle Lowry who's been through those wars, who's been through those struggles, and has finally gotten over the mountain to get that chip, right? Because his performance enabled that aspect of it, playing next to Kawhi Leonard. To me, that is a much more sure bet than thinking that you're going to get these same kind of MVP-like kind of performances consistently through the playoffs, especially when you run up against teams like the Milwaukee Bucks and the Brooklyn Nets, who I don't know if those core guys that Doc Rivers is going to be leaning on is going to be able to do that through the course of a 7-game series. I'm just saying you cannot have not more than enough of that if you've got somebody like Kyle Lowry out there. That's my only take on that part of it.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with the sentiment itself. I just, again, it's hard to evaluate not knowing the actual cost that it would have been, because then if you move that, then you also have to tie yourself to Lowry for the next few years as well too. And
understandable.
Reports are out there he may want 2 years 50 because he is 35. So do you want to pay him $25 million a year? But it does put you in a championship window. So they have to cost benefit analysis, what that means to them. And at least at this time, it didn't work out.
All right. So now that I have firmly supplanted where I stake my claim about the Philadelphia 76ers, and Shaw has, firmly stated why, hey, out of, kind of pump the brakes a little bit. let's get right
Well,
into,
well,
you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like,
and I don't even want to cut you off, but I mean, like we do have to get into it. So I think maybe the first thing to get into and maybe kind of finish off Philly is that they didn't do anything. Like they didn't sit pat. They did acquire George Hill, who
mhm.
by most people's accounts is a very good and competent rotation guy and a decent floor general. Now, again, I don't love his overall playmaking skills, but again, remember they have Ben Simmons, so they don't need somebody to come here and be the master facilitator that Lowry would have been. Hill is a guy who plays defense, shoots a three at a pretty good clip, usually over 40%, especially in the last couple of years here, and is somebody as a veteran guy, as you alluded to, I think expertly, Doc can trust. Doc loves his vets. So you can't get Lowry, but I wouldn't even say Hill doesn't play anything like him, but he is probably the next best and definitely the cheapest option they could do to upgrade that position and give them depth in there. So I think that's a great place to start with the George Hill acquisition since they weren't able to get Lowry. So what are your thoughts on Hill going to Philly?
In the immortal words of Jay-Z, he's all right. He ain't real. Like, and I'm not trying to really, totally diss George Hill. He's a good player. But I don't know whether or not George Hill is good enough for what I think the Philadelphia 76ers needed. Now, if you're asking me, is this the best option? All right, fine. Yeah, go with it. But don't tell me that you're going to start throwing up George Hill against the Kyrie Irvings and, against the Trae Youngs. And look, he was in Milwaukee, was he not? And what did he give the Milwaukee Bucks? So it's really going to come down to how Doc Rivers utilizes George Hill, right? Like how much dependency is Doc Rivers going to truly have on that Sixers backcourt to carry them through? And I guess the important thing about this to me, Shaw, when looking at what you're opting to get, and you use the word cheap, is the cheaper option. I've seen that being used on most articles that were written about the move for the Philadelphia 76ers to get George Hill. Cheap does not mean good, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, cheap is basically another word for saying I don't want to spend what I really know I should be spending for the premium quality that's required for me to get what I'm trying to get here. And I guess I put this in this context. The Philadelphia 76ers ain't winning championships like the Miami Heat, ain't winning championships, like the Los Angeles Lakers, ain't winning championships. When was the last time the Philadelphia 76ers won a championship? When was the last time the Philadelphia 76ers got to the NBA Finals? When was the last time the Philadelphia 76ers got to the Eastern Conference Finals? So I guess what I'm saying is when you see a team like the Philadelphia 76ers doing what they've been doing this year, and your intention is to get into the fray, so to speak, you're not dipping your toe in there. You're going all in. You know what I'm saying? You're wipeout going all in. You're taking it, you're going to plunge. Then go plunge and get that player that is supposed to give you the things that you know you're going to run into a brick wall when you get into the playoffs doing. And the backcourt play of the Philadelphia 76ers is going to be an issue for them going into the playoffs. So I don't know if George Hill, he's certainly a fill, but he is definitely not something that's going to fix what I think is going to be a glaring problem for the Sixers team going into this upcoming playoffs.
All right, fair enough. I think having the Sixers steal the show here, so let's move on from Philadelphia and go into some other trades, bro.
Hey, that's why Villanova is still in everybody's Sweet 16 and still picked to go to the chip, because that's how that's going to play. All right, so I was really curious, Shaw, about which teams you really felt like won this trade deadline. So go ahead and lay out to me who you really, thought stole the show, so to speak.
I think there are three clear winners, and maybe even push that to four if you kind of take it into account. So I'll go with Chicago. You talking about going all in? They're all in. They are like, listen, we need to make the playoffs.
Are you surprised by that? I'm really surprised that the Chicago Bulls really are all in. It's just weird to me. But yeah, please, I want you to elaborate on why you see the Bulls as being winners.
I didn't see the moves of Vucevic, which was probably the biggest move made of the day or trade of the day, coming at all. You know, a lot of teams were linked to want him. Orlando said it would take a king's ransom to get him, and they got a decent haul. You know, especially when you add in the multiple first. I think the 2021 first is top 4 protected, if I remember correctly, and this is a pretty sick draft. And there's a chance Chicago still doesn't make it. Zach LaVine turns an ankle or something like that, and you know they have Vucevic, and he's just back to a slightly better version of Orlando. And maybe that's underselling the rest of this roster a little bit. So let me back up. But I think Chicago is definitely a clear winner here. They even get Daniel Tice to back up now Vucevic in that move. And I just feel like the pieces that they've added, along with their coaching, along with the roster that they keep intact, moving off of Wendell Carter Jr., who had been underperforming. They were still looking potentially to move Markkanen, but weren't able to get that done. A Markkanen for Lonzo Ball trade is like they were hoping to maybe do that straight up. New Orleans was like, nah, no thanks. But overall, Chicago is definitely one of the winners, I think, this today. And I'll just run through them really quickly. Denver, getting JaVale McGee to back up Jokic, but the bigger move of getting Aaron Gordon.
Before you run through, I get where you're coming from because I know you want to get through them, but I want to stay on the Denver Nuggets, train real quick. I like the idea that the Denver Nuggets went ahead and made a play for this. But how do you see this? Do you see that this is like future, potential if they're able to lock up Gordon, and have this kind of core where you've got Murray, you've got Gordon, got Jokic. What are your sentiments in regards to that? I know the immediate is there, but I'm really curious about from a long-term perspective, do you see the Denver Nuggets, hanging around and actually being incrementally better because they went and made that deal?
I absolutely do. The thing about this is they got Gordon without having to give up Porter Jr. So they keep that piece intact. Gary Harris, who just has kind of fallen out of favor and wasn't really playing because due to injury, he gets sent on along with a relative prospect in RJ Hampton. But with Barton there and complaining about not ever wanting to come off the bench anyway, now you kind of secure Barton in that starting role as the shooting guard. Porter plays a 3, and your front line is really tall. And remember, Gordon isn't a free agent. Gordon has, I think, 2 years left on his deal. So you get a decent look at the team as currently constructed. You get a lineup of Murray, Barton, Porter Jr., Gordon, and Jokic as your starting 5. And hey, you're in this thing. And one of the things that, while we talked about this on our last show a little bit, what was happening in the East is different from what's happening in the West. The West, they smell blood in the water. They're looking at the Lakers and like, yo, you're LeBron, yo, you're out. Oh, AD, you're out. It takes one ankle injury or whatever the case may be for us to feel like we have a chance at this thing. No one's scared of the Lakers like they were coming into the regular season. Oh, it's done. It's over. They got the 2, best 6 men of the year and blah, blah, blah. And it was a wrap and everyone handed them the championship. Now the season is played out. And people are like, you know what? F that. We're going after them and we're going to go out there next. And the Lakers, when they're whole, probably should still be the best team in the Western Conference. But it's nice to see a team like Denver take a swing here, and a big swing that's going to keep them in contention here for a couple of seasons.
Well, yeah, and I think that to me is what we're talking about, right? Like if you're the Denver Nuggets, and I think part of this is going back to when the Denver Nuggets actually challenged the Los Angeles Lakers last season in the bubble playoffs, right? If the Los Angeles Lakers just completely waxed the Denver Nuggets, I'm wondering if the Denver Nuggets situated in this same circumstance, fast forward a year, would they be pulling the trigger on getting a player like Aaron Gordon? Now, listen, obviously the jury is still out on whether or not Aaron Gordon is going to be able to live up to the hype that he was brandished coming out of college. I think that there is definitely some upside. I think getting out of Orlando for him is kind of more of a cleansing thing for him. I don't know where he fits in the grand scheme of a Mike Malone-based type of offense, but certainly the pressure isn't on him to be that kind of guy because you're still dealing with Murray and Jokic and the dynamics that those two guys play. But to have him as a cornerstone piece for that front court, and to your point, while still keeping Michael Porter Jr., this then makes the Denver Nuggets a legit threat every single year over the next couple of seasons, even for at least the 2 seasons they still have Gordon. And that to me is a good thing. That to me is the kind of move that a team feels confident and kind of, I'm going to use your word, Brody-like, in bullish in their ways of saying, we're not going anywhere. We're trying to even get better than where we stand before. And so that, to me, I say, hey, whether you're Eastern Conference or Western Conference team, take a page out of what the Denver Nuggets are doing. Because even if they fall flat on their face, they didn't know that they're making that move clearly with the intent that they believe that they can be significantly better by doing it, not significantly worse.
Yeah, he's a switchable wing defender. Took over some playmaking duties, especially the latter part of this year when Orlando had all their point guard issues. So another guy who can pass in that front court and just tall. Like that front court is extremely long. Porter, Gordon, and Jokic. That's a really big front line. And outside of Jokic, who's only going to be on centers, but both Porter and Gordon have some level of switchability. So maybe Gordon helps Porter Jr. come along with his defense in some aspects as well. So I like Denver a lot for what they did, and I applaud their efforts. So shouts to Tim Conley, and Mike Malone and those fellas out there who for getting this thing done.
All right, so just piggybacking off of what you're saying in regards to the Nuggets, let's talk about the Magic and the fact that they were able to just basically break this team up. And I'm just going to be the first person to say it. Finally, damn it. Like, I don't know how many times you and I have had conversations about what exactly was this team? Like, what exactly was Clifford working with regards to this Magic team? And I'm finally happy that, now these guys can probably go elsewhere. We can really evaluate, what kind of players they could truly be. Are they as good as we keep saying that they are, except they're just playing for a bad organization or, in a bad situation? Or will they be able to go out there and finally give themselves a chance to make a contribution for a team that's going to be playoff hunting, right? So the Vucevic is out there in Chicago, the Gordon's out there in Denver, Fournier in Boston. We'll get into that in a moment or so, but I just like the idea that the Magic figured out a way to move these guys along and really get settled on the idea that you're just starting from the ground up once more.
Yeah. Again, that's what I was going to say. They're a winner to me. They finally have accepted who they need to be so that they can get into a metamorphosis and change their fortunes of their future. Like, this is what it's about. So, and they got decent young pieces and pieces even back in that. I mean, Wendell Carter Jr., somebody, hey, maybe it's change of scenery. You make that work out. It probably signals the end of the Mo Bamba era. So Bamba probably gets moved over the summer as well too. But you remember you still have Jonathan Isaacs, who's on ice. He'll be back presumably next year.
Well, I found Carter to be kind of like a Jonathan Isaac ish without the crazy. So,
well, Isaac's more fluid. I mean, Carter's still probably more of a front court player, while Isaac's going to play a little bit more on the wing and the perimeter. But in terms of just guys who've not been able to live up to their potential for one way or the other, now they have two of them. And maybe something kind of clicks there with under Clifford for sure. But even getting Otto Porter, when he got minutes in Chicago this year, he played well. It just kind of got squeezed out of the rotation as they're trying to develop Patrick Williams and some others over there. So I like that aspect of it. And then we already talked about them getting RJ Hampton, even Gary Harris. All these are kind of reclamation projects, and they can kind of sift through to see, all right, what's good, at least, and especially this year with all the injuries they've been dealing with. Remember, Cole Anthony's still hurt, and Markelle Fultz is not coming back this season. So it's an interesting day for Orlando, where they still get decent young talent to evaluate. They have a future with some guys who they think can be maybe not cornerstone pieces, but pieces, and it allows them to be in probably improve their position for what is supposed to be a very great draft, right? So if they get one of these top 3 or 4 selections, now you have that quote unquote person of the future, along with Fultz, along with Hampton, along with Isaacs, along with Carter Jr. And hey, you're starting to be on your way, and you're starting to see maybe like a little bit of OKC in them without all the draft picks, that the Thunder have. So I like this for Orlando. I think they definitely are a winner of today's NBA trade deadline.
This is The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we've got more to get into regarding the trade deadline, and the flurry of trades have taken place. So you don't want to miss out on this great convo we're having. We got some bills to pay, but hang tight with us, man. So much more to get into here on The Baseline. All right, so we're finally doing our first plug, Shaw, after going some 25 plus minutes into our bantering about this crazy trade deadline day. Crazy, right? You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this is our special edition of the Baseline trade deadline edition, discussing winners and losers for today's just crazy make moves, type of caliber in the NBA. So I know that there may be one or two other teams that we can talk winners, but I want you to highlight the losers here. It's interesting because you indicated the Rockets and you also indicated the Celtics as losers. I'm more curious to you about why do you feel the Celtics are losers?
They are alternating, or they're working in a timeline that doesn't quite make sense. Especially if they would have kept Tice, and it's like, all right, well, they thought this was all they could do. Cool. And they get Fournier, and all right, well, we'll ride out with this. But to get Fournier, then to move Tice, who's playing very big rotation minutes for you right now, is a starting center. And yes, I realize that opens up time for Time Lord, who's been kind of chomping at the bit to get more time. I just don't quite get it, because really what it ends up doing is you send on Teague, you send on Javonte Green as well too. And again, net doesn't really matter, but those were cost saving moves. So Boston is basically trying to get under the tax, and they accomplished that, and maybe feel like they can be a player in the buyout market, which I don't know how amazing it'll be for them, especially as currently constructed. So it's just kind of a weird situation to operate in, especially giving up part of the traded player exemption for Evan Fournier. Now, Fournier is having a good season, averaging nearly 20 a game, shooting 40% from three. These are all things that help on its face. But are you now going to commit, 2 years, 40 to Evan Fournier for the next X amount of year, or for the next 2 years after this, to keep him in green and pair him alongside Brown and Tatum and Kemba? Like, now, is this your team? I just feel like for what has come out of Boston in recent years, that TPE might have been better spent in full going into the summer, because they don't have a chance. What did the Fournier move do for them now, especially after trading Tice? How does that make them any better in the Eastern Conference? This team came into the season with title contention. Now they're maybe starting to have some role acceptance. They're not that good. But if you realize you're not that good, then you don't spend half of your TPE on Evan Fournier. That's my thing. It's just, what are you doing? It didn't really make sense to me.
Yeah. So every single point that you just made, Shaw, I completely agree with you. The only caveat to this is I don't see the Celtics as losers. The Celtics are exactly who they are. Right? Like, so to me, this is just carryover of the Danny Ainge playbook, right? The end result here is Danny Ainge makes a move that you really can't classify as saying, was that really necessary? Like, did that really make sense? Or am I missing something here? Like, this is just how it always seems to be with Danny Ainge. And I think if you're the Boston Celtics, this is what I think people really just need to be prepared for. This is what you're getting with the Boston Celtics, period. Okay? You can say, hey, we're wasting the best years of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. That's cool. I mean, whatever you're going to need to do to make peace with whatever you're going to basically see over the next couple of seasons. But I stopped recognizing where the Celtics are trying to make moves that is really trying to position themselves the best way possible to be competing against the top tier teams. Like, it almost feels like they're doing it halfway, half-hearted. The Kemba move, that Kemba move wasn't a move out of desperation. That was a move out of necessity. That was a move that had to be done, because you cannot keep Kyrie Irving. So to me, when I see them make a move like this and getting Evan Fournier, he's basically Gordon Hayward with a French passport. That's it, right? Like, yeah, to everyone saying, yeah, he fills a need. He fills a need that you basically let walk out the door, but at least with Gordon Hayward, you got to the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't know what you're going to get by having Evan Fournier a part of this roster, right?
Well, hold on. Let me interrupt right there, because I think I can't subscribe to Fournier's even Gordon. He's nothing like Gordon Hayward. He's not
No,
as
but
big.
what
He
I'm
doesn't play
saying
the
is,
defense. But hold on. But the other part of it too is because it harkens back to even a deeper conversation for Boston, which we probably should get into in a whole separate show. But how bad do you think Ainge is like, damn, I should have probably made the Indiana trade for Gordon Hayward. Now, it would have netted them Miles Turner and Doug McDermott, but you know what I mean? Like, would you rather have Doug McDermott and Miles Turner right now for the next 2 years, or Evan Fournier as currently constructed? And again, hindsight is 2020, but Turner leading the league in blocks, Doug McDermott having the best season of his life. It's hard because then you could have kept a good portion of your team intact, and maybe your fortunes are changed a little bit. So it harkens back to exactly what you're saying. Ainge is losing a little bit, and now he's had some miraculous home runs, and when he hits it, but he has a lot of strikeouts as well too. And I think when you try to balance that, especially with the Celtics fan base, it's difficult because people want to harken back to the Celtics Nets deal. Well, that's how many years ago now? That shit is over. Like, there's no more equity for that. So then it's like, well, he traded, Marco Fultz for Jason Tatum. Dope, extremely shrewd.
But look how time has flown, Shaw. Like, from that time frame, look where the Brooklyn Nets are now, right? I mean, I'm not saying that trade singled itself out to say, oh, it was a matter of keeping the Brooklyn Nets out of the fray. I'm just saying that look now where the Brooklyn Nets are. Right? The Brooklyn Nets are among those teams, right? So that window of where the Atlantic Division was basically there for the taking has been occupied by the Toronto Raptors, has been occupied by the Philadelphia 76ers, right? And where in it has the Boston Celtics truly said to them that they have dominated? They haven't. They've been good. They've been just good enough, right? But they have not been great. And I don't see where a move like this necessarily, even just for, aesthetic purposes, I don't see where this makes the Celtics great. I don't see where it makes them good. I don't see it where it makes them anything but what they are, which is why I was saying I don't see them as being losers. I just see them as being, the Celtics right now.
And that's fair. I mean, it's a fair assessment, and we've talked a lot on the show about acceptance, and I think media, fans, everybody is starting to accept that this is just not the team we thought they were. This is who they are, a middling, trying to stay above 500 team with 2 all-stars on their roster, with the rest of the guys trying to get in where they fit in, but in the whole, not a whole lot of play creation and other things going on in their favor. They're just okay.
I will say this, we'll move on to the Rockets. I will say this, Danny Ainge's Bill Belichick approach to how he's been managing this roster is indicative of someone who I think is a little bit out of touch with the way things are happening in the NBA as it pertains to in other major sports, right? Like, so Bill Belichick can get away with doing what he does for the New England Patriots, and he can still build and make teams competitive. The turnaround for the NBA is much quicker, and the window to win is much tighter. And I think Danny Ainge's approach to how he goes about putting together these type of rosters, to me, is counterintuitive to what he's been able to do over the last few years, which is put together talent. Like, you have Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and Marcus Smart. I fail to understand and recognize why this team is not playing in an NBA Finals. And if you look back on it, even if you relied on those 3 guys alone, it is clearly evident that other teams in the NBA have built better teams and rosters to combat that. And Danny Ainge doesn't seem to want to invest in that aspect of it. He doesn't want to go for the home run deal, right? The closest one was the Kyrie Irving one, and that was more a bailout than anything else. That wasn't even an intent to say, oh, by putting this guy on this roster, this is it. This is exactly what we needed. No, because he didn't address the other things that still the Celtics completely lacked for the last 5 years. So, again, the Celtics to me are the Celtics. Now, why do you think the Houston Rockets are big L losers? Not big L, because I love big L, but the big capital L and losers.
There was, was kind of influenced by something that I saw on social media, and it was basically they turned, the James Harden deal into Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk and second rounders. And I don't even remember, like, whatever. It was just like when you look at what the end result of that is, especially after you move Oladipo for the pennies that they allow the Heat to give them for him, it's just mind boggling. And that roster is just an absolute disaster of young whatever, with the exception of Wood and Wall, who's just like, damn, I didn't know it was going to be like
setting
this.
setting up a brother to fail. Damn.
Just,
right?
Wow. You're talking about a couple brothers, because Steven Silas has got to be like, what the fuck? I waited, years to get my first head coaching job. And this is what I've walked into: a superstar Hall of Famer who doesn't want to be here anymore. I end up on a 20-game losing streak. And now look what the rest of this roster is right now. So sure, there'll be players in the lottery for sure, and having a top pick to potentially build on something for this upcoming summer. But when you just look at what the end result is of losing Harden, it's pretty paltry. And while I understand Oladipo was not held in the same regard as most 20-point per game guys because of his injury history, because the fact that he is a free agent and would probably end up in Miami anyway, it's still kind of awing to me that that's all they got. I mean,
I feel like I feel like this move would more shed a light on the Houston Rockets in their inability to really get what I think everybody. It feels like everyone else knows what the Houston Rockets really need except the Houston Rockets, and the Houston Rockets did the kind of deal that just made them become more scrutinized than necessary, right? And if you're the Miami Heat, like, I feel like this is kind of like an Andre Iguodala kind of move a little bit, right? Like it's really flashy in the beginning, but you really won't see the you know what I'm saying, the crux of it until you see Oladipo on the basketball court and you see how well, like, how he can truly contribute to that team, who obviously still has aspirations of trying to make a deep run in the Eastern Conference, right? So it's interesting to me because this is more about the Houston Rockets and really just how broken the organization, I think, is in its prioritization about what they're trying to do for this team, this organization moving forward. And I feel bad for Steven Silas because that's not what you signed up for, right? Like, it's one thing if you're just giving him you're giving him guys and he's got to basically try to make lemonade with like bad lemons here. But my thing is like, damn, man, like, even in the middle of this season, which has already been topsy-turvy, the idea is that you want him to figure out a way to make these guys come out and be competitive after seeing the Houston Rockets handle things that they've basically been handling throughout the course of this season. I feel bad because I think if you're Houston, if you're not going to really do a genuine deal for this organization and for your head coach, then don't do the damn deal at all. Like, I feel like this is going to have a much more lasting effect on the team and the organization and the personnel than it really is about the names that are being thrown across the blotter because it was a trade that was being made by the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, it's tough. And I just, same thing, harken back to, Raphael Stone, would you rather have not had Karis LeVert in this situation? Yeah. And now you trade Oladipo for, what was it, Olynyk, Bradley, and a pick swap? Get out of here, bro. Just get out of here.
All right, so Shaw, you had a couple of to be determined. So I'm presuming that the moves themselves, the question is still out there, so to speak. You're not quick to pass judgment on them, I presume, is where you're going with that sentiment or thought.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, let's try to run through them as well. Clippers, Rondo or Lou Williams for Rajon Rondo. You get a floor general. Rondo hasn't been doing anything in Atlanta. It was just a terrible fit from the very beginning due to injuries.
He was just vacationing in Atlanta. He all along wanted to go to the Clippers. They
had interest, so I don't know why it didn't happen that way. But The
He's
Hawks
playing
get
hard
to
to get.
flip Rondo and get Lou Williams and get a proven veteran guy who can score in the playoffs to come off your bench and is willing to accept the bench role. So I think it's a home run for Atlanta. But for the Clippers, we got to see, because we haven't really seen Rondo much this year. So I don't know what to make of him. And while he was great as on the Lakers, we just don't know enough. So that's why I say to be determined with them. In Dallas, they get themselves, Nicolo Melli and JJ Redick. So a couple of shooters to pair alongside Luka, out there on the wings, gives him another kick out threat when he's driving and should presumably be able to knock down shots. Redick also injured. So the verdict is now, and I was kind of, I don't know, I'm just not a big Redick guy, at least not at this stage of his career. He's got a great podcast. So if people don't check that out, Old Man and 3, go check that out. JJ Redick doing a great job on that side. But for what he's been able to bring to the basketball court, I don't know. And because he's been injured, it's hard to figure out like what the move will make. So I think for them, they're looking to get a Seth Curry replacement, and maybe he provides that. And then Melly can potentially come off the bench as well too, and then give them some decent shooting in spot minutes. He's not going to play a whole lot. So
I don't
that's where I'm with Dallas.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that one, Shaw. And again, like we've been talking about, teams making moves. If you're the Dallas Mavericks, I think trying not to go big with anything in regards to what was available for this season, I think was the right move, because I think the Dallas Mavericks, to me, this has been a disappointing season for the Dallas Mavericks. Now they'll likely make the playoffs, and I'm sure they'll be competitive. But I feel like in some regards they may have taken a step back. And if you're going to start trading and making moves simply because you're riding on the hopes of what Luka Doncic gives you, and wherever Kristaps Porzingis is going to be and things of that nature, I think you're fooling yourself. So getting a solid player on your roster is never a bad thing. And if you're not really giving up a ton to do that, I'm completely for that. Like if you're a team like the Dallas Mavericks. So I completely agree with you there. Where I'm real funny on, Shaw, and I didn't quite understand this one, was the Blazers moving Gary Trent for Norman Powell. Listen, I don't really understand the idea about this. I know someone who we've had on our show, who I've been on their show, loves them some Gary Trent. And to see him being moved to Toronto just to get back Norman Powell, our girl Team Mom is not, I'm sure she is not feeling this whatsoever. And I'm just trying to understand the logic here. I guess because of the, Gary Trent being restricted at the end of the season. But, I mean, still, man, like, I don't see where this is a benefit for the Blazers in that kind of move.
Well, I mean, I'd have to ask. I mean, Norman Powell, people have been watching what Norman Powell's been doing in Toronto. Guy's averaging 20 a game and shooting 40% from three. So he does it in a much different way than the aforementioned Fournier. But he's been lights out, and they haven't been able to keep him off the floor. And when we talked about the Raptors a couple of weeks ago, it was like, well, do you want to be the team that pays Norman Powell? Because what is his value worth? So I think that's where it's a little bit perplexing from the Blazers standpoint, because like, all right, well, are you going to commit to Norman Powell after trading away Gary Trent? But here's why I think it makes sense for Portland. But that's why it's like, hey, it's kind of to be determined. Powell, while he's shooting great from three, is a more natural driver and slasher, and he will boom it on you. He will drop that hammer on you if you're caught slipping. Trent doesn't have that level of verticality. And I think if you're playing alongside Dame and CJ with McCollum now back from his injury, now Powell can be a guy that camps out in the corner or can get to the dunker spot and maybe finish, as Dame and CJ are trying to drive and he's coming in off the handoff or off the kick, and he's coming in and he's going to try to finish that. Trent is more of a shooter. Now, he can get to the line. I mean, he can get to the lane and, try to do layups and things like nature, but he's not as strong, not as powerful as Norman Powell are. So I think they went from trying to get Trent as a complement to CJ and Dame on the outside to somebody who can complement them in both ways as a slasher and someone who can still kind of spot up from the 3-point line as well too. So I understand the move, but I don't, like you said, I'm not sure how much I like it. And I think from Toronto's standpoint, hey, Gary Trent now is a knockdown guy. So that should be pretty interesting to see whether they start him or bring him off the bench out there in Toronto
I
or
think
Tampa.
I look at it like this. The Messiah, I think, always has he always has a card up his sleeve. I think bringing a guy like Gary Trent is almost kind of like, hey, this is another guy. And since we're not moving Kyle Lowry, he's going to be learning under Kyle Lowry, who I really think is as gritty a basketball player as you will ever find. And that's the same kind of grit that Gary Trent comes and plays. He plays that chip on the shoulder. He could be an asset. Like I can, again, I see this from the point of view of where you're a Toronto Raptor fan, you like players like Gary Trent Jr. because they're translatable. Like it's a transactional type of play here for what you can potentially get. Now he's going to go crazy like where Normal Powell is right now, probably giving you 20. But every aspect of Gary Trent's game is built for people to remind themselves if and when they do lose a Kyle Lowry that they still got players out there that are going to play like that, like come off and play with that kind of intensity. People out there in the North, they love that, right? So for the Raptors, I see that as being a benefit for them in that regard. But again, I'm just on the fence about the Blazers' intent and need to have to want to do that. But again, for the numbers' sake, the way that you're showing it, Shaw, completely on board with it. So there's one team I know that we didn't get an opportunity, I guess maybe save the best for last, and that's the Atlanta Hawks. And it's interesting because the Atlanta Hawks, Shaw, they are a 500 basketball team, but by all accounts, everybody's got this belief, I guess, maybe to say, hey, if they get into the playoffs, if they, get seeded and, in a good way, they could be a problem for the other teams in the Eastern Conference. They can be a tough out, this, that, and the third. So obviously that now puts them in the play to make some moves. I'm really curious from your perspective why you see the Atlanta Hawks as being a winner for this trade deadline buyout.
Yeah, we'll have to circle back to another team, I think, as well too. But with Atlanta, as I kind of intimated a little while ago with Lou Williams thing for the Clippers, with Lou coming there, it's just a nice piece to have. Again, and a veteran. So they didn't move Collins. I think maybe all is well there now. And while they've played a little bit, they struggled a little bit in their last 2 or 3 games. They were on an 8-game winning streak, prior to this most recent stretch. The moving Lloyd Pierce out and bringing Nate McMillan did wonders for them. So they basically ascended from 10th or 11th in the East to they were as high as 4. So right now, I think they just feel like, what, our time is now. Our guys are back and healthy. Bogdanovich and Gallo. DeAndre Hunter is back, although Cam Reddish just went out. So, but getting Lou Williams, as I alluded to, just makes some sense for them, and a guy that Nate McMillan can trust as a veteran, especially when you trade Rondo, who was supposed to be the grown up in the room for this team. Gallo obviously is also a veteran too, but doesn't really come off as a locker room leader type guy. While Lou Williams, gets to Atlanta, with the lemon pepper situation and the strip clubs, that could be a little bit distracting. But overall, I think if you can turn Rondo, who was doing literally nothing for you, into Lou Williams, I think that's definitely a hit and a home run for Atlanta.
All right. And then, you said there was another team you wanted to circle back on. Who was it that you were referencing?
It's Miami. Listen, they got Oladipo for damn near nothing. They got Bjelica for damn near nothing, knowing that they were probably moving Kelly Olynyk off their roster, which they did. And now they're at the top of the list for LaMarcus Aldridge in terms of the buyout situation. They had machinations to try to get to Kyle Lowry as well, but did not want to trade Duncan Robinson or Tyler Hero. And I, was telling people on Twitter, if they wouldn't trade Tyler Hero for friggin' James Harden, they're not, they're not trading Hero for Kyle Lowry. Like, that's definitely not going to happen. So I think Masai might have been kidding himself, trying to get Hero in that, but maybe Duncan Robinson could potentially have been had. But what they ended up doing was keeping everything. They kept all of their current players. They didn't even move Dragic in the deal, and allow themselves to have a roster spot to potentially sign LaMarcus Aldridge, or maybe if another name comes up, And with expirings, if they don't like the way Oladipo looks, they don't like and again, Dragic is on a 1+1 team option. They can get rid of him and still have cap flexibility next year.
Well,
Pat Riley,
can I also
masterclass in asset management.
Absolutely. Can I also throw this into the mix as well too? Maybe by the Miami Heat also putting themselves in play, potentially may have cop blocked the Philadelphia 76ers in doing whatever they needed to do. Again, psycho crushing the competition a little bit, in not making the play or not pulling the trigger. And listen, if Kyle Lowry is, as what everyone, says, believes that he is to a team, to a playoff contending basketball team, guess where Kyle Lowry is sitting right now? He's sitting in Toronto. Are there any aspirations of the Toronto Raptors possibly making these playoffs? Very slim. Very, very slim. Probably not at all, right? So there is a key player right now who could have tipped the scales of the competitive balance in the Eastern Conference, whether it would have expanded or even shortened teams. The Miami Heat getting what they want while keeping a guy like Kyle Lowry at bay, because it may have raised the price, by them being in the mix amongst the other teams, forcing them to walk away from something. Kyle Lowry is not going to be a problem for the Miami Heat. Kyle Lowry is not going to be a problem, for the Milwaukee Bucks. Kyle Lowry is not going to be a problem for the Brooklyn Nets. You know what I mean? But it could be a problem, say, for a team like the Philadelphia 76ers, because they don't have them on the roster. So I'm just saying, sometimes things like that just kind of play themselves in a weird kind of way. But if you have a guy like Pat Riley, to your point, Shaw, it's not just the names and it's not just the assets. It's also the mental games, the mind games that are being played between the executives and the organizations to keep one player from coming over to another team to affect and tip the scales of what's going on, not just in the division, but also in the whole conference.
Yeah, I love what you said there, because I think Riley is somebody who does do those types of games. Like, he's notorious for trying to block Danny Ainge and some others like that, if he gets wind that, hey, they might be interested in something. So he might have you on the line like, all right, well, let me think about the hero thing. All right, give me till 255. You know what I mean? Meanwhile, he's already struck his deal to get Oladipo elsewhere. And, he didn't just screw over the Eastern Conference. He screwed over the Lakers potentially as well. I mean, well, we're giving him too much credit. We don't know that this happened in that way. But if it did, the Lakers were also interested in Lowry, as we started let off the show with, and they didn't get him, because again, Masai's price was too high. But I think for Riley, being able to keep everything he wanted, all of his players intact, just moving on the edges for guys, for lack of a better phrase, didn't really mean much to their rotation, while maintaining cap flexibility for next year and giving a chance this season. It's just, I think the Heat and Chicago, with Denver coming in as a close second, I think Heat and Chicago are the clear winners of the trade deadline, especially if you factor into what Miami will potentially, as rumored, to be able to do in the buyout market.
Man, and we were able to fit all of this within one show. And this doesn't even include some of the other deals that took place, right? Like, I'm sure we can expound on some of the other previous trades that had happened that kind of set the tone for what obviously was a frenzied trade deadline. The buyout, obviously, you made mention of the fact that LaMarcus Aldridge officially is being bought out by San Antonio. So, there is a likelihood, that he may, position himself to be playing for a contending team. And I'm sure that would be, putting a big old smile on a guy like Jimmy Butler's face if he does intend to go to Miami. So much is happening right now, Shaw, and yet we still have got another month and a half of basketball left to be played. Just absolutely nuts. Some time. Yeah, right. That's like eons in translation in the NBA space. Awesome conversations, awesome show as always, man. And again, man, your breadth of knowledge with regards to the factoring of how these guys need to, are going to play the part for their teams and whether or not they are financially substantial or deficit-made moves, to me, is just remarkable, Shaw. You wow the senses yet again.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say. And I mean, I think as we sign off, I just want to shout out a couple of other moves. And we didn't get to talk about it. It happened after we recorded our last episode, but with LaMelo Ball now out presumably for the year, He just recently had surgery. He may or may not be back. They make a nice depth move to get Brad Wanamaker from Golden State. Now, again, Brad Wanamaker is not no LaMelo Ball, but it allows Devontae Graham to step back into the rotation as a starter, and Wanamaker gives them some depth, at the point guard position coming off the bench. So, but shouts to LaMelo. Hope he's back soon for Charlotte, who's another nice story in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, man. Brad Wanamaker, that guy. Anyway,
so end the show with Brad Wanamaker. That's how we do it.
That's how we do it. Well, listen, I'm not gonna end it with Shams or Rhodes. They got their own shows going on. Anyway. Once again, man, we appreciate everybody for hopping on board with us this week, man. A lot of good stuff. Please definitely check out our previous show. Go to www.thebaselinenba.com. Also, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, again at me at Game Face League, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. For the Baseline, Kylie, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you guys. Thanks for hopping on board with us this week. Our special edition talking about the trade deadline, and we'll catch up with you next time.